We're going to see the greatest move of God with not a few thousand, 3,000, but we're going to see billions come to Jesus.
Welcome, guys, to the first ever 1930 podcast. Our goal, our dream on this podcast is just, we're not going to overproduce anything. Super chill, super relaxed. We have an open word. We got coffee, we got tea, we got Jesus, we got Holy Spirit, and we're just going to dive into the word. And we want to see Jesus. We want to see him rightly. And so my guest today, we have Zach Webb. I've been running with Zach for almost 3 years now, I think. We just been doing life together and just been loving on Jesus. And I don't think I know anyone with a more pure heart for worship and for the purity of worship, and somebody that burns and actually has like a holy frustration for like just the purity in worship, and to see this generation really worship in spirit and in truth. So we're just gonna dive right in. It's not gonna be super long. It's not gonna be a super long podcast. But I'm gonna start with one question. I think the question that I have today that I felt was to ask, what is worship and what merits good worship?
That's a hard answer. Well, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is we don't actually merit what good worship is and what isn't. And I think a lot of society and a lot of churches nowadays, they think that we get to decide when we don't. I think that's the first fault. Is the Lord had to rebuke me of like, you don't even get to decide what good worship is. And so the Lord has he's very precise. He's not confusing. He's not confused on what he likes and what he doesn't like. And obviously there are things I feel like we get to do that do please him and that he sees as, and I'm just kind of speaking from a little experience that I have. I think there's times where it's a good job, and then there's times where like you tap in to something supernatural in worship where the whole room locks in, and like an actual revelation that's not milk and that's real meat. And then you can tell in moments of worship anywhere where God, it's almost like everyone in the room recognizes that God is pleased with what's going on. And then it becomes much less about the room and trying to navigate the room. You know, we've been in scenarios where we're trying to navigate a room, but whenever all the people join in together and we go, what's going on? And we just follow, I feel like that's the difference of just what I've seen of like, there's a real difference when you go into, whether it's a service, whether it's a prayer room setting or something, and you have a guess of what you think God's going to do. You know, we did this in living rooms, where we would try to lock in as a team in intercession for an hour and a half and ask the Lord what he's trying to do. And then most times, probably 90% of the times, something would happen. And then we would lose all of our control over what's going on in the room, and we would just follow. And I think that's whenever it's the same thing as what you wanted to talk about as intercession. It's the same thing as going into worship. Of like, whenever we have, I think, found what the Lord wants to do, because really we can't decide that. Even in worship and intercession, we don't decide what the Lord wants us to join in on. He decides, and then we join in. In communion with what he wants to do for his people and for us. So I think overall, I think worship is just been misinterpreted, which I don't think it's anybody's fault. I think it's just over time, things got more produced and became more about congregation and who we can keep around. And they respond well to this song. They don't respond well to these songs. So then leaders or whoever, and again, I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think we just have kind of slipped away from the purity as we just began to add different things that weren't necessarily needed but maybe sounded cool or looked cool, and it worked for the world. So sometimes we think that it's going to work for the church, and for a couple weeks it might bring in people, but in the end people aren't leaving with fruit or real encounters with God. I think, I don't know. I don't really know. I don't really know. I like to think that I know what pleases God. I like to think that I've discovered maybe a percentage of what pleases God. I've seen rooms change based on locking in with what the Lord wants to do. And in those moments, I have completely lost control.
Yeah.
And become dependent. And I think whenever we realize that we can't be independent, and we become dependent, even on the outcome of a room, I think that's whenever He's pleased.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I enjoy about watching you lead worship, is I know that your dream is to find out what pleases the Lord. And I think that's something that's lost in our generation when it comes to worship, where kind of what you were articulating was the heart behind worship oftentimes is, how do I move a room? But your heart posture has been, how do I move His heart? And that has caused you, from what I've seen just by living with you, it's caused you to be obsessed with this. And so you read this, and then you find that you enter in with praise and thanksgiving. And so you get excited about the idea, I can enter in by praise and thanksgiving. Yeah. And so you lead out of that place, and then you hit a pocket, and then you get excited because you find what pleases His heart. And when you please His heart, it moves your room. Yeah. And so because I've seen you move rooms, or I've seen the Lord move rooms through your yes and through your obedience. So how have you gotten to a point, because I'm sure there's young worship leaders that are watching, and they've led worship for quite some time, and they've kind of hit this wall of I want to see God move a room, or maybe they're in a religious region, or they're hitting walls in worship, and leading worship. How have you seen, in your experience, how have you seen breakthrough in seeing God move a room?
Nice. Todd. Yeah, I mean, there's a tendency to, I think, for worship leaders get frustrated at rooms. I feel it. I feel it all the time. Every worship leader that can even slightly discern has felt that before, of they're not responding the way that I thought they would. And they're not lifting their hands are in their pockets. People are yawning. Yeah. I was at a revival night last night, and I'm a worship leader. I've been entrusted to lead this congregation that has no idea who I am. They've never seen me before. I don't know their lives. I don't know how deep they are with God. I don't know anything about them. But I can look around and I can tell who's catching what's being sung, and I can tell who's not. But I don't get frustrated at them because they haven't received that bread yet. I don't know. You know what I mean? There's probably times when I zone out in worship. But most people, I think, whenever they begin to zone out, they give up, and then they go, they get lost. and but as a worship leader, I think that mindset that I was just talking about of they're not responding the way that I want them to, I think is what people give into and that fleshly desire from the first question of how do I get them to respond how I want them to.
Wow.
And I think falling into that is the dangerous place. And that's how you slip away from the heart of worship.
Dang.
So what I've learned is there's been a few rooms that I've noticed people lose. Well, I don't know. It could be a few things. It could be the band and the worship leaders have veered off of what he wants to do. And then the reaction is everybody gets lost. Or like it's too swirly.
Yeah.
And the congregation only has so much of a capacity for spontaneous worship. And they're following, you know?
Yeah.
Like the congregation or anybody in a room in the setting is following the worship leader and following the Spirit of the Lord. And so if the worship leader begins to overthink, what can I do in this moment that will push the boundary or push the wall and break through the wall, that's the wrong question. I think it's like, what can I do?
Yeah.
Or what should I say? Or what should I do? Because then you're dependent on yourself to change a room. What I've done that has worked a few times and that I've noticed is I will let whoever's leading the song, even if I'm feeling that discernment of the congregation's lost.
Yeah.
They have no idea what's going on. Or if they're singing a song, like say you're singing a song about Revelation 4 and 5. There's so many songs. Open the scroll, break the seal.
Yeah.
There's so many songs that are about that. Most people have no idea what they're singing.
Yeah.
They don't.
It's true.
And it's not their fault.
Yeah.
Which is okay. But when one of the worship leaders closes their eyes and swirls out, say worship leader Johnny is,
Johnny
has his eyes closed and is just singing because he's caught a revelation of the Lord in Revelation 5, and it's broken him. But everybody else has they're not there with Johnny, so they get lost. So then they end up staring at the screen and waiting. Really is what happens. And I'm even guilty of this when I'm not worship leading, of going, I don't really know this song that well, so I'm going to stare at the screen because I don't know the song. I'm going to wait and see if the Lord does something. And then there's a tendency, I think, to like, there's this fine line, I think, of pastoring a room while worship leading and then having your own encounter with the Lord, which really the songs that most impact me in the secret place, when I bring them to a congregational setting, I lead with the most compassion and the most conviction.
Yeah.
But there's a fine line of teaching. There's been so many times where if I start singing a song, or if I know that the congregation is going to need biblical context for this worship song, I'll say something. And I'll read what the song is talking about, and then I'll go into the song so that everybody's locked in with unity,
Yeah.
So if Johnny is lost in the Holy Spirit and is just having an encounter but nobody's following him, he's not doing a good job because he's shepherding the room. So for me, I think I just recently have learned this being at Circuit Riders, being more of in a spontaneous prayer room setting, where I might have a burning song in my heart, but if the congregation doesn't follow where I go, where I've been in the secret place, then I'm leaving them.
Yeah.
And I'm abandoning the assignment for that set. So I need to make sure that if they're not following, I need to tell the band to die down, and I need to explain what I'm singing so that they can come in with me.
That's good.
Because I've used this analogy all the time. Whenever you're like ministering to the Lord, it's like everybody is watching. This is the best way that I can explain it. Is you don't want to just sit and minister to the Lord yourself in a worship leader role and just get lost, just you and him. It's good in the secret place, but you have to realize that you're responsible for who's watching you, and you're leading people. So you want to minister to the Lord, yes, but you want to explain like you've heard me use this analogy, but like turn and like, yes, be focused on the Lord, but always like watching how people are responding and discerning. Because if they're not getting it, then you need to turn and go, hey, this is what I'm singing about. Let's do it together. Let's all do it now.
Yeah.
And that's whenever I have discovered that's what brings in unity and allows people to worship in spirit and truth. Because I might be worshiping in spirit and truth on my own, but if they don't know this truth, then what's happening? What do I need to do? So that's probably the best way I can answer that. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that's huge. Just you have a burden to teach rooms that you're in. And it reminds me of a tour stop that I had in Wisconsin. I was at a stop. Day one, it was blank stares, hands in pockets, like driest room I've ever been in. And I got frustrated. I asked the Lord, what happened? And he's like, they wanted to enter in, but they didn't know how. Next day, day two, I'm hosting, and I pull up notes from my circuit rider DTS, and I pull up Genesis 22. And this is the first time worship is mentioned, and it's Abraham and Isaac. And so it's like, once I broke down costly worship, what is worship biblically, and almost teaching in a way that gives permission for people to affectionately love on Jesus in a way that's costly. It was like once that teaching point came, the whole room came to the altar, got on their knees, and were sobbing in the presence of God. And it was like all they needed was permission.
They felt permission, yeah.
And so it's like, what do you feel like is lost when it comes to the revelation of worship in our generation when it comes to the Bible? Like, how do you go from Genesis 22 to the modern day fog machine worship night? And I don't have anything against fog machines or lights. I think it's awesome. But like, how do we get from Genesis 22 to how do I serve the room rather than minister to the heart of God?
Yeah. I think there's a bunch of things that we've done wrong, that I've done wrong, that I've gotten caught in, wanted, or I think, in Genesis 22, it's whenever he says, right? Okay, so since we're here, which one is it? Which verse is it? Whenever he says we're gonna go up
he says he tells his
disciples,
he tells his the people that are with him, I'm gonna go up to the mountain and worship before he goes up with Isaac.
Where is that?
I think it's stay here. Yeah, verse 5.
Okay.
Stay here with the donkey, and I will go yonder.
Oh yeah. Stay here with the donkey. Abraham told his servants, the boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then I will come right back. It's so weird how the Lord, I don't know where Abraham heard this from, because the Lord didn't say that sacrifice is worship. It's like he's going to kill his son, and Abraham masks this interaction with, hey, you just stay here, don't worry, me and Isaac are going to go worship the Lord. In Abraham's mind, he knows he's going to go kill his son as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And when we interpret this, and even Lindy, whenever I first heard this, was from Lindy and Chase, in my DTS of like worship anywhere should be costly.
Yeah. Yes.
And if you want revelation, you want discernment, or if you need clarity, you have to go into worship with a laid down life.
Yes.
A laid down heart, completely sacrificial, because worship is definitely not for you.
Yes.
You know, that's like rule number one.
Mm-hmm.
Worship isn't for you.
Yeah.
It's really not for you to receive. And you won't be changed if you're going into worship with what can I get.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the first act should always be, what do you want me to lay down? And asking the Lord, what's in the way? What can I die to? What branch can you prune? Or what branch do you need to cut off completely? I was just reading this morning. He's the vine and we're the branches, and he cuts off every single branch that doesn't bear fruit so that it can wither up and die and burn. And asking the Lord, okay, I'm at the altar, I'm here, you can cut off any branch that you want to. And then in return, he prunes you. And you become more like him, you hear him more, and this can go anywhere. But that in itself is the heart of worship, of this place of, I'm in desperate need of you. I don't want to be so comfortable that am now independent from you.
Yeah.
Because if you're independent from God, that's the original sin. That's the first sin. That's the fallen angel sin, right? That's Luciferian spirit of, I want to be independent from God.
Yeah.
I want to be in control, and I feel like I've got it when you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that desperate need of blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will inherit the kingdom type of interaction, where you have become so dependent and so poor and broken spirited that you need God. You need him. I need him every day. That's how you should always enter in, as a sacrificial, laid down life in desperate need of God. That's like rule number one.
Yeah.
I think if people were to just see that and slightly understand that they would realize that there's so many extra things that they've added onto their life that they don't need. Like, in reality is like, I live a comfortable life, really. I'm in a nice house, I'm in a nice kitchen, we have a nice concrete, wallpaper wall, and some cool plants, and we're in California, and there's not a single cloud in the sky, and it's sunny outside right now. Reality is that I'm really comfortable right now, honestly. And I need to get to a place where I can go, okay, I didn't really work for any of this. God freely gave it to me. But if it were all to go right now, like, would I blame God and go, you're unfaithful?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people are living so comfortable that they've become independent from God. So I need to make sure that my heart is so dependent on him so that I can worship him.
Yeah.
And I can interact with him, not asking him to do things for me, but simply just to love him and to be obedient to him. And I need to be ready in a split second that if he has blessed me with all this stuff, it's okay to have nice things. It's okay to have favor, and but in a second, if he tells me to give it up, I don't want to be the rich young ruler.
Yeah.
I don't want to say no to God and then be depressed and suicidal after he's asked me. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's just too many people that are comfortable and want to live comfortable and want to live independent And so they work, strive to become so independent. And that's the American dream.
Yeah.
That's what society has taught us. Then you become independent from God.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are too independent from God, you're walking in blatant sin and unrepented sin. People don't know that. People don't realize that. It's not just pornography. It's not just, oh, I stopped cussing, or I stopped drinking, I stopped partying.
Mm-hmm.
It's like working for independence from God is a blatant sin that needs repentance.
Mm.
And I think once I got to that place of, holy crap, like everything that I'm working towards, striving towards, it's only leading me to more independence from God.
Yeah.
When if I would just allow him to prune me and allow him to use me and say yes to everything that he says and wants me to lay down, then I'll see the most fruit. And it's countercultural. Like everything about the kingdom is flipped on its head and countercultural.
Yes.
But people don't realize that if you were to just lay everything down that you think is good for you, lay your life down and just say yes and be obedient to the Lord, that's actually the fruit that you need. And that's the fruit that's going to bless you and allow you to bless others and allow you to live life abundantly.
Yeah.
That's one half of that question. I think the other half is something, and it's like what is holiness, what is purity. At the root, purest form of something, say like the purest form of honey, right? I know Jeremy Riddle uses this analogy in his book of like the purest form of honey is honey with nothing added. So purest form of worship is worship with nothing added.
Yes.
So the moment that you start to add things and try to manipulate for preference or for age group or for, it can be, you name it, you're taking away from the purest form of worship.
Yes.
So really, you don't need to add a fog machine. You don't need to add more lights. You don't need to add more instruments or more good singers or a bigger building, you name it. Like you will be fine with this. With this statement that Abraham uses.
Yeah.
And the purest form of worship. Right?
That's it.
The more that you add things and the more that you, because really this is really what it is you start to add things because you think you can do it. And you think that it's going to work.
Yeah.
So then you take control, and it's the same thing as becoming more independent from God. Because you think that you have what it takes, or the more stuff that you add and spend money on for congregations, you think it'll work.
Yeah.
When you're adding more, to the purest form, which is not it's not what the Lord wants. So I think over time we have added to something that doesn't need addition.
Wow. Yeah.
And it needs just the heart message, and it just needs the ground root of what he wants, which is sacrifice. And
Yeah.
That's like probably 5% of what worship actually means, maybe. I'm still learning. But I know that sacrifice works. I know that dependency works. So that's like 2 words of probably an entire lifetime of discovering what worship actually is.
Yeah. That's just so good. Yeah, we're gonna wrap up. I'm gonna add just a little point of just Genesis 22. I think Abraham just got to a point where he was so convinced that God was good. Like, I think we read this and we think, how could Abraham do that without hesitation, without question, without anything? But I think Abraham was so convinced of the goodness of God that he knew that somehow, some way, God was going to work it out. And so he comes in, and I think a question that can kind of encapsulate Abraham's heart was, how deep will you let me go for love? And I think sometimes we can come into worship and it's this transactional thing. But Abraham's heart was, I want to give you something that's costly. And how deep will you let me go for love? How abandoned will you let me be? And ultimately, the result was God's heart was moved, saves Isaac, and then he blesses Abraham, blesses his descendants. There's a ram in the thicket who obviously foreshadows Jesus. Jesus will ultimately come from his line. And so there's this whole product of costly worship. And it wasn't Abraham's dream to have blessed descendants, for the ram in the thicket. That wasn't on Abraham's mind. His mind was, how far will you let me go for love? But the byproduct was God's heart was moved in such a way that Abraham's life was transformed forever. So I think there's a place in worship, or ultimately there's a place in love, where real worship says, how far will you let me go? How much will you let me give? And I think that's something that I've seen you do time and time again, where it's like, I've seen you give up opportunities for pure worship, for a pure life in Jesus, where the dream really has become Jesus. The dream has become him. And so I think that's why God breathes on your ministry and the way that you lead and stuff like that, because it comes from a pure place. And he has become the dream. And you're like, how far will you let me go for love? And you're never content. You've never reached a point where you're satisfied. You always want more of him. And I think that's true worship. That's what he means by, I'm going to raise up worshipers that will worship in spirit and in truth. So I think that's it. We're going to wrap up. This is a crazy episode on worship. Many more to come with Zach. We literally live together, so we'll do some more episodes. But we want to keep these somewhat short in a 30-minute arena. Hope you guys were blessed. This will be on YouTube, probably some clips on TikTok. I don't know. But subscribe, like, share this with a friend. I hope this blessed you. Comment below what you think and what stuck out to you. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace. Nice.
You should cut out the piece.
Okay, whatever. I thought it was cool.